finals on the Open Series. He actually caught wind of me saying he's really good at losing the finals, and I said, am I wrong? He's like, no, I just want to win one of these stupid things. So we'll see if he can do it this week, and he's obviously off to a great start.
We had him on camera earlier, briefly, towards the end of a round, but even that short glimpse that we had Dan on camera, he played very well to squeak out a match against either Naya Hexproof or Naya Beatdown list.
Yeah, it was more of a brave Naya take like Brad Nelson's deck. And, this is actually just a matchup here of just kind of two old-school decks with not a lot of new cards. We know Brian doesn't have any new cards. As far as Musser's, I'm taking a look right now to see if he's got anything crazy going on here. And, I mean, he's pretty direct and to the point. Actually, no new cards as well. So maybe old school's the way to go. As we are underway here, Musser with just a swamp. You saw Braun-Duin play a Temple of Malice. He's going to follow up with an Overgrown Tune, pass the turn back as round number 6 is underway here in Cincinnati.
Pretty hard to get too reactive with or too fancy with your reactive decks, rather, when it's not really clear what's going to be going on in the metagame.
We talked about a little bit with Mono Black because this is a Domri, so we'll see where Brian's going to tick this up, see if he finds anything, and he does not. You can go one way or the other with Nightveil Spectre or Lifebane Zombie. Musser actually has a split here, 3 Lifebanes and then 2 Nightveil Spectres in his main deck, so doing a little bit of both as here's a Mutavault and a Hero's Downfall.
And the split is something I'm starting to see a little bit more of as well. Not as uncommon as it used to be.
Brian going to play a Courser, going to gain a life. There's a Temple of Abandon. Pulachronos is the card he's going to look at as far as Scry is concerned. See if he wants to move this anywhere, if he's happy.
More than likely that he's going to keep the Pulachronos. Not that it's very good against Mono Black Devotion, but it's at least just a big body. It's got to be better than the average draw step, I would imagine.
Yeah, in this matchup, it's all about just presenting threats early and often, is what I have found from the Jund Monster side of things. As now Musser's going to play Desecration Demon. It's also about having a Dreadboard for that thing right away, because that is a huge problem. Elvish Mystic, the top card here for Braun-Duin, and it looks like he does have Dreadboard in his hand.
Yeah, a fast Desecration Demon, a really good recipe for beating certain decks like green-red monsters. Even against Mono Blue Devotion, it can be quite good. The Jund Monster, of course, does have Dreadboard, so it's not just lights out like it is against the green-red build of monsters.
Braun-Duin also does have Gorkline Rampager in his hand as well, so he can make an attack here with the Courser and put Musser to the test, see if he's willing to block or not. And I think he'd rather actually Rampager and kill it that way than Dreadboard. We'll see, though.
The thing is that if you attack, Dan's so unlikely to block. I guess an attack could represent Mizium Mortars, so there's some percentage chance that he doesn't block.
Yeah.
But I think that Brian would rather conceal the fact that the Rampager's in his hand, and if he attacks and then Dreadboards after combat, he's definitely indicating that he has Rampager in hand. So I think Brian would prefer to conceal that information.
Okay. Courser comes across for 2 here, another backup Courser after playing a land there. So Braun-Duin sitting at 22, Musser at 18. Musser's got some work to do now. A couple copies of Grey Merchant in his hand. See Underworld Connections as well. A little bit behind. Not terribly far behind, but a little behind.
The bigger problem is that every creature that Brian plays is going to warrant some sort of response, and Dan doesn't have anything like Pack Rat or Desecration Demon to provide a long-term response to a number of threats.
Musser going to play a Swamp as his 5th land. We'll see if he wants to start dropping Grey Merchants or do something else here.
He has Underworld Connections, and given the pace of this game, it seems like getting connections online would be step 1.
Yeah, it seems like he can take this turn off to do it. He's not underneath that much pressure right now, and that's exactly what he's going to do before passing it back over to Braun-Duin. He's going to draw an Elvish Mystic for the turn. You see Blood Crypt off the top of his deck here. That's the 3rd red necessary for an overloaded Mizium Mortars in case that does come up. Braun-Duin going to put that into play untapped. Trigger the 2 Coursers, so no life gained or lost here. Dreadboard, the top card. That's an important one. Future Desecration Demons aren't going to matter very much here. It's going to fire at Mutavault and come into the red zone here for 6.
And now Dan's in a position where his removal spells aren't very good for the rest of the game because Brian has enough threats. He knows his demon's no good because of Dreadboard, so he now has to try to work the game into a place where he can use Grey Merchants to burn out Brian. But even that's pretty tough to do against the Courser Crewfixes that Brian has, gaining him some incremental life. Bioblade's
going to show up to the party, takes care of the Mutavault. 4 damage from the Coursers do take place. There's a Pulachronos that Musser didn't know about, so you see what's on the table here. Braun-Duin is ahead in this particular game. Musser does have an Underworld Connections in play, but he's got a long way to go here to catch back up.
And I know that you were a big advocate for adding black to green-red monsters, and I would have to imagine that Desecration Demon was on the top of the list of reasons to add a couple cards like Dreadport.
That was the main reason, because that card is very difficult to beat, as this is a gray merchant that's going to come in. It's going to gain 4 and drain BBD 4/4. So looks like 16 to 18. Looks like 18s actually will be the life totals here. Brian going to turn over a copy of Sylvan Caryatid to reveal to the coursers. Added Dreadport to his grip. So you see Brian's going to take his time and think through this turn here. Does he want to Dreadbore this gray merchant? Yes, no, maybe so. Does have Rampager in his hand. Also has a Mizium Mortars. Looks like he's going to start by attacking here.
This is a really nice attack for Brian, too, because, again, Rampager is still concealed in his hand. Dan has nothing to really indicate that a Rampager's here, so...
Interesting thing, too, here is that, you know, if you're familiar with Brian's work, you know that Brian is a very big fan of Gore-Clan Rampager. I wasn't so much. I liked Reaper of the Wilds in the deck. But if you're familiar with Brian, you know that he's such a big proponent of Rampager that this is the kind of card that he would like to play in this sort of situation. Now, instead, you're going to see Pulachronos just fight for 2 and get the job done post-combat, and that'll be Brian's turn.
Yeah, if you're confident that Dan, if you're going to be able to beat Dan without showing the Rampager altogether, that's even better.
So the board pretty much stays the same. Braun-Duin still pretty far ahead. You see Musser drew a Desecration Demon for the turn, but that one's not going to matter very much. Dreadboard at the ready, and there are plenty of creatures to sacrifice, too.
But Dan's just up against the gun here. It's not clear he can really navigate this game through the Dreadbore.
No, I think he's just too far behind at this point, and oddly enough, and this statement kind of feels blankety, but it seems like it's pretty hard for Mono Black to actually catch up from positions like this.
Yes, there's no Mutilate, there's no Damnation, there's no Sweeper, so unless someone gets sloppy and plays into Bioblight, or maybe you have Drown in Sorrow in some matchups, it's pretty hard for the deck to catch up.
Thoughtseize going to reveal Elvish Mystic, Dreadbore, Mizium Mortars, and a copy of Gore-Clan Rampager that we've been talking about quite a bit this particular game. This could just be an information Thoughtseize where Musser sees the cards and then maybe concedes the game. We'll see. No guarantee of that, but he's so far behind at this point and just took 2 from Thoughtseize that might be his only avenue right now. Yeah, just get some info and then move on. Sylvan Caryatid's the draw here. Take a look at the top card. It's another copy of Mizium Mortars. So now Musser knows that BBD has access to, Mizium Mortars throughout his deck. More than 1 copy, for example. And here's an attack. Gonna activate Mutavault. Block here and then cast a Devour Flesh. Still gonna attempt it.
Yeah, again, this is not a long-term solution to anything. Brian can simply lose a Courser, hit for 2, and still represent lethal the following turn.
Eat the Mutavault. Things like that. I mean, there's definitely a series of draws that can take place here that are favorable for Musser. It's certainly not over. There's Sylvan Caryatid, there's Elvish Mystic. You see Musser's at 4, Braun-Duin's at 22. Musser gonna untap. Looks like he drew another copy of Devour Flesh. I think he's looking for more of like a Hero's Downfall-esque card this turn.
Yeah, in theory, he could have found Hero's Downfall, killed the Pulachronos, survived the attack, and then played a Grey Merchant, gained some life, started to make some headway. It would necessitate Brian missing for a number of turns in a row, but it's not impossible.
Because at this point, removal is basically like missing. Yeah. For Brian, Mortars and Dreadboards and things of that nature. They're not the best draws here. There's a Rampager. Brian going to untap very quickly, attack with everything, and that's going to do it. So Brian Braun-Duin's going to win game number 1 here over Dan Musser. Jund Monsters up a game over Mono Black Devotion. As both players do go to the drawing board, we're going to do the same. I've got Musser in front of me, so I'll take a look at 4 Doomblades, 4 Duress, 3 Pharikis Cures, 2 copies of Erebos, God of the Dead, and 2 Dark Betrayals. It seems pretty straightforward to me. 4 Doomblades in, 4 something out.
You don't like Duress in the matchup?
It's okay. I don't know how many discard spells you actually want after sideboard. I guess you could potentially move up to 6 if you'd like to. I mean, the first step here is you're going to board in 4 Doomblades. What 4 cards do you want to board out? You've already got Lightbane Zombie in your main deck. You want to leave those in. So I think you can make an argument for 2 Nightveil Specters can go, and maybe 2 Bioblights can go for those 4 Doomblades. And then would I want to cut something for Duress in this matchup? Devour Flesh isn't great here, but it's pretty good. You obviously want Hero's Downfall. And I think the matchup, because you're the control deck more often than not, you still want Underworld Connections.
What about these Bioblights? I mean, those can probably go, right?
Well, I think those 2 Bioblights and 2 Nightveil Specters go for the 4 Doomblades.
Okay.
And then if you want to board in Duress, you have to figure out something else to take out. And I don't think there's anything else great to take out here.
I think Gray Merchant's pretty bad in this matchup.
Okay.
I think it's only really good in the matches, in the scenarios where you're kind of already winning.
Okay.
Because Brian's very good at picking apart your board. You know, he has enough removal spells and ways to push through blockers and all that kind of stuff that the Gray Merchants aren't going to be for very much. I mean, you saw that game, Dan couldn't keep anything into play.
Sure.
And it's not like he's going to be doing a lot in terms of incremental damage. I feel like if I were in the spot, I would rather have Duresses to take out removal spells or Planeswalkers and open up a path for Desecration Demon. I think that's a better plan than trying to go with Gray Merchant. I would definitely want the Underworld connection to the matchup because the game's a little bit on the slower side and Brian's hitting you in big chunks. He's not doing, 2 here and 3 here. When he wins, it's because of overwhelming amounts of damage. So connection seems powerful to me here, but I don't know. I know that Gray Merchant is a staple in these lists, and a lot of people kind of never question taking them out. But I often think they are among the worst cards in the deck in particular matchups.
Okay. On BBD side?
2 Abrupt Decay, 2 Golgari Charm, 4 Mistcritter Hydras, 2 Rakdos Returns, a Mizzium Mortars, 2 Putrefy, a Doomblade, and a Vraska the Unseen. I think Vraska, the 2 Putrefies, the 2 copies of Abrupt Decay, and maybe Rakdos Return, maybe not, is where he's going to go.
Yeah, I like most of those cards. I think, as you mentioned, Rakdos' Return is kind of debatable. I don't think the other cards really are, but there's also this thing here where you have to make sure you have a right balance of creatures and threats to present along with removal, because you want enough removal spells to make sure you don't lose to a pack rat draw or have enough ways to take care of Desecration Demon, but you don't want to overload on those cards because then you can just lose to a game that involves Underworld connections very easily.
Yes.
So finding that right balance is definitely tough to do, and I'm still actually pretty unsure what the right number of removal to threats is. I've talked to some people like Ross Merriam who advocate boarding out 2 copies of Sylvan Caryatid, because while you do want some mana acceleration, you don't want too much. Just things like that where, you kind of make the numbers a little bit goofy, a little bit wonky, so that you can have enough removal, have enough relevant creatures, and not be overloaded on one or the other.
Yeah, it's a very common mistake. I think people, you take a look at Brian's list, 2 copies of Mizzium Mortars and 1 in the sideboard. I think most people assume in the post-board games you either have 3 in your list or you have 0. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of matches where you want just the 2 or even 1 is correct, depending on what exact mixture of threats and answers you're looking for.
It's just this kind of weird balance where you want to have removal spells that can take care of pack rat, especially when you're on the draw. So that leads you to want to leave in Mortars or bring in Abrupt Decay, things like that. And here's a Thoughtseize to start things off. So you see Brian does still have Mortars in his deck, brought in Putrefy, looks like an Elvish Mystic, a Courser, a Blood Crypt, a Stomping Ground, and a Stormbreath Dragon. So actually a pretty good hand here for him. He's got a draw that is really good against both pack rat and Desecration Demon.
But this is the type of hand where Dan can pick a path here. He can potentially take Putrefy, opening a path for a large creature, or he can take all the threats, stranding Brian with removal, and then try to play an Underworld Connections game. So a lot of different ways that Dan can go here.
It's not even out of the question to take a card like Elvish Mystic right now either with his Thoughtseize, depending on how you think things are going to go. Now, if you saw Musser's hand, he's got 2 copies of Devour Flesh, so he can actually just take care of that Elvish Mystic very, very easily. He's also got a Lifebane Zombie and a Hero's Downfall, so a really good hand here for him. It looks like he just needs another land, preferably a black one, to be able to function appropriately here, but he gets to really decide the way that this game goes, and he's going to take Stormbreath Dragon.
Yep, he has and now he gets to map up the next couple turns, just as you said.
Stomping Ground's going to come into play untapped here for Braun-Duin. He's going to go down to 18. He's going to play that Elvish Mystic. Chances are that's not going to make it through the turn because of Devour Flesh, as Musser's going to draw a card. It's a copy of Temple of Silence, which is a black source that he was looking for. Unfortunately for him, that's going to come into play tapped. We'll see if he can find one for his draw step, as Braun-Duin's just going to play a Temple of Abandon. Take a look at the top card. And he picked up a Xenagos for his draw step.
This is a big draw for Dan here coming up. He would really like to avoid having to use a Devour Flesh on a Courser of Krufix.
Yeah, I would much rather Lifebane Zombie that. And again, as good as those temples are in this deck, and we have seen them be great, thanks to Lifebane Zombie and just because of Scrying, coming in to play tap is kind of bad news, but there's a Swamp that rolls off the top, and here's a Lifebane Zombie for that Courser.
Huge draw step.
Yeah. You see Braun-Duin's hand, Putrefy, Xenagos, Mizzium Mortars, and a Blood Crypt, and sure, he's got an answer to Lifebane Zombie, but Dan knew that from the Thoughtseize, so he doesn't mind that. He's basically looking at this as an expensive removal spell that also eats a removal spell.
He's just trying to run Brian out of resources. That's all that's going on here. Anytime he can trade a card of his for 2 of Brian's, almost no matter what they are, he's going to be pretty happy.
Brian again, Mizzium Mortars had Lifebane Zombie. His draw for the turn was a copy of Gorkland Rampager. You do see Musser's hand right now. He's got the Temple. He's going to play that, do a little Scry action. I think he's considering if he wants to attack with Mutavault or not. I think maybe he's considering not attacking with it to be able to leave up Hero's Downfall. You know, how important is this 2 points of damage right now versus being able to just kill something on your opponent's turn and then untapping and doing something on your own turn?
Yeah, although he is giving away a lot of information also by not attacking with the Mutavault.
Absolutely.
So that's another factor.
You see, he's really giving a lot of thought to this decision. And what's really interesting now is you know, because these players are both incredibly skilled, now by Musser thinking about this, he's also giving away information, right? It's like, well, why is this so difficult for you to just not attack with your Mutavault? Like, if you're not just snap attacking, then you're probably thinking about holding or representing something.
When the players get this good, everything is information.
Scavenging Ooze is going to show up to the party here. Musser taking a look directly at that Devour Flesh. Doesn't really seem like it's going to get much better at this point. You know, there is consideration of using maybe Hero's Downfall on this, but you have to think about what you're up against. A deck that has Domri and Xenagos.
Yeah, it's possible Dan was contemplating if he could try to work the game into a place where he could get Brian doing it in response so he could save life or something, but just much more important to use his mana efficiently.
Brian is going to activate Scavenging Ooze here and eat something. He's going to gain a life and a little bit more from the Ooze, so. Going to pass back over to Musser, who's going to draw a card. There's a Pack Rat. That's a very good draw.
That is a big draw step.
He knows what's in Braun-Duin's hand, which is a Putrefy. And that's the removal spell. And because he, you know, does have the necessary mana to be able to play Pack Rat and activate it, now this game changes drastically. Let's not forget that Mutavault that's in play as well.
Yep. Brian needs to find mortars plus land pretty quickly, and that's hard to put together.
Braun-Duin's fourth land was just a Temple of Abandon, so that land comes into play tapped. Musser's going to discard his Hero's Downfall. He's going to make a Pack Rat. He's going to untap. He'll take a draw. Every card now is just a Pack Rat at this point. I don't think anything changes for him here.
I do not think that Dan's going to switch gears at this point. He's not going to deviate.
Let's keep one thing in mind as well. Think about the hand that BBD kept this game. Elvish Mystic, Courser, Blood Crypt Stomping Ground, Mortars, Putrefy, Stormbreath Dragon. You're keeping that hand, I feel like, 100% of the time.
Yes.
And that hand just got blown up by Thoughtseize.
You couldn't ask for a much better hand. I mean, if you had to sculpt it, it would look something kind of close to that.
Yeah. Putrefy is going to take care of something here. He's going to take care of the original copy of Pack Rat. You saw Mutavault activate. We'll see if Musser wants to discard right now to get more points of damage across. It looks like he drew a Desecration Demon, and he did. Do you like that as playing Desecration Demon, or would you rather that be a Pack Rat?
I like playing the Desecration Demon here, I think.
Okay.
It's a better hedge against Mizzium Mortars, and the game could get into that spot. You know, if Brian goes untap, kill your Pack Rat, it's okay, I still have Desecration Demon in play. Pretty short clock.
Gore-Clan Rampager plus a tap Blood Crypt comes into play here for BBD. Desecration Demon trigger on the stack, coming across for 6. Brian going to go down to 15. Musser going to cast a Duress. There goes the Xenagos. Do you like Duressing there, or would you rather be Pack Ratting?
I like Duressing.
Any particular reason?
Xenagos plus Rampager is fairly good against Pack Rat and Desecration Demon.
Okay.
So it's, you know, I'm not saying that Brian would be advantaged or whatever, but it is an annoying card for him to work around right now.
There's, of course, your Crewfix. Turn of the top card, Mizzium Mortars. Interesting. As we do continue on here, Musser going to untap. He's going to take a draw. See, the life total is 15 to 14. Again, every draw here can be a Pack Rat for Musser or something else. Musser with a Mutavault among those lands. So Pack Rat can become a 2-2, or with a Pack Rat activation can become a 3-3 at any point. And of course, Desecration Demon threatening 6 points of damage every turn. I would say that Musser is advantaged here, but not by much.
Yeah, it's a close one. You know, keep in mind that Brian has the potential to overload Mizzium Mortars next turn if there's an untapped land on top of his deck.
Musser going to put the trigger on the stack. Looks like it's clear for takeoff. Demon's going to come in for 6, put Braun-Duin down to 9. And Musser just passes the turn back. So Braun-Duin's going to draw that copy of Mizzium Mortars. We all know that. Top card of his deck, it's a Domri. Not the best card in this situation.
And Brian's quickly entering the phase of him having to sacrifice the Desecration Demon every turn.
You know, the tension's really on now, right? Where it felt like it was very important for there to be a land to overload Mizzium Mortars or just cast Mizzium Mortars to take care of things. Because sure, he can do that, and then Musser can say, okay, I'll activate my Pack Rat in response, and you still have the same problem to deal with.
Right.
So there's kind of tension coming from two angles. Every turn that you don't find the appropriate card makes Pack Rat better, but it also makes Demon better too. So Musser says, all right, I'm going to activate Pack Rat in response to your Mizzium Mortars trying to kill my lone Pack Rat. So I just get to keep this one. So that's why you don't see one shift in and out, because now it's just an untapped one that's in play.
And Dan's got to be thrilled with being able to trade Amizium orders in this spot.
Of course. And he knows the card that's coming, too, which is Domri, which doesn't play a huge role in this game because it doesn't take care of the Desecration Demon, which is the true problem.
Although it does potentially give Brian a lot of looks next turn between the Courser and the Domri.
Yeah?
He has a lot of cards he can burn through looking for Dreadbore.
I think Brian right now trying to figure out exactly how he's supposed to attack. How aggressive can I be in the face of a Pack Rat and that Mutavault along with Desecration Demon? In theory, he's facing lethal next turn.
Yeah.
It's never easy beating Mono Black Devotion. No new cards from Journey of the Nyx going into this deck. Nothing's really going to change for this deck. It's just going to have to adapt to what people are doing around it. But that doesn't mean it's not still powerful. It's still very, very good.
And Dan doing a really good job of executing the game plan that I spoke of. It does appear that he brought in Duress, and he's just using his discard spells to cut a path for either Pack Rat, Desecration Demon, or Underworld Connections as appropriate.
This deck just wants to shorten your resources.
Yeah. And Brian has so many important spells. It's Planeswalkers or removal spells. All of these things are cards that Dan's very concerned with.
And dressing a Dreadbore is really, really good. Things like that.
The information matters a lot too because John Musser's isn't the most redundant deck on the planet. Often their hands have one of a particular thing, one good threat, one removal spell, one Planeswalker, whatever. So knowing about that and cutting a path is super good.
Musser's draw step for the turn was Grey Merchant of Vast Valley. Put the Desecration Demon trigger on the stack. Brian said, you're clear for takeoff. Put him down to 3. Plays the Grey Merchant post-combat. That'll be lethal, and we'll play a third one here between these two fantastic players, and Brian Braun-Duin and Dan Musser, both sitting at 5-0 here in Cincinnati. And you see Brian go back to the sideboard right away. Dan going to do the exact same thing. I wonder what they're moving in and out right now. And because they're both going back with a purpose. They're not, kind of, I don't know if this card's good or not. They both grabbed the cards they wanted, put them in, and now they're grabbing the cards they want to take out right away.
It wouldn't surprise me if Devour Flesh is the card that's getting changed here on Dan's side because it's so much worse on the draw than on the play.
Yeah.
If Brian opens the game with an Elvish Mystic, it's possible Devour Flesh just doesn't do anything meaningful.
Can't forget about those Mutavaults that can be sacrificed to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. On the play, Dan can, especially with the discard spells, he can try to sculpt the game in such a place where Devour Flesh is meaningful, but on the draw, I think it's not very good.
Yeah, Devour Flesh, it really varies from how good it's going to be. Not even only just on the play of the draw, just how the game's going. There will be games where Devour Flesh is great. There will be other games where it's like, oh, you have a Xenago, send an Elvish Mystic. Well, this card's terrible. I have to maybe target myself, sacrificing a Desecration Demon for it to be good.
Good in quotes there, too.
Yeah. And at the same time, that could be a game-winning play that you wish you had access to, that you may be taking away from yourself. So things do change very, very quickly in this matchup. And we'll see exactly what both players did change for game number 3 here as we make our way through round number 6.
Pretty compelling game so far. Both players, switching games where they got to execute pretty close to a textbook plan for how they want to approach the matchup.
Yep. I think, if you, especially in game 2 for Musser.
Yes.
If that's how he wants every game to go. I've got information. I get to, create a game exactly how I want to go. I get to use all of my spells. Fortunately for him, he drew the 3rd land to come to play untapped, the swamp on that turn. Things look probably much different in that game if that land doesn't come to play untapped.
Yep. And with the Grey Merchant versus Underworld Connections versus, how did Dan find room? It wouldn't surprise me if he went with a split of those effects, in fact, because the second Underworld Connections is a lot worse than the first Underworld Connections, and the second Grey Merchant is going to be a lot worse than the first Grey Merchant in a lot of spots. I know they stack up, but drawing an opening hand of 2 copies of Grey Merchant is likely to be a mulligan.
Yeah, you probably chop down to maybe 2 of each of those effects after sideboard.
I think that's a reasonable way to do it, too.
Because drawing 1 is always going to be pretty good, but as you mentioned, drawing multiples, or heaven forbid, drawing multiples in your opening hand is no bueno.
No.
All right, both players are going to take a look at their openers here. You see a Vraska in Brian's hand, among some other things. Not sure he has a lot of land there. It looks like he has an Elvish Mystic, a 1-lander with maybe a Sylvan Caryatid as well. It's funny, part of the reason that this hand might be keepable is simply because he's on the play.
It's also just discarding against Mono Black Devotion is a disaster because of the discard spells. You have to keep some sketchy hands.
There's an Elvish Mystic. Well, it looks like he may have kept the sketchy one here. We'll see if Musser has a Thoughtseize or a Duress. Yep, there's a Thoughtseize. This is going to blow up his hand pretty bad. You see Brian's hand pull a Chronos, a Domri, the Sylvan Caryatid, the Vraska, and the Courser.
Okay, never mind. I didn't know that there was Sylvan Carrington in the hand. This is a totally reasonable keep.
I would keep this hand too.
Yeah, I thought that the Sylvan Carrington was another non-mana creature spell. In which case, this is too risky for my liking.
Yeah,
But
I would keep this hand based off the fact, like, if my opponent doesn't thought seize me, I'm in the driver's seat. And if they do thought seize me, if I draw a land, I'm fine.
Yep.
Now, because I can see Musser's hand and see that he has a Doomblade, if Brian doesn't draw a land, he's not fine. But, you know, if he does draw a land, his hand is right back on it. We're still looking at one heck of a game here.
Untapped red mana is insane for Brian on this
You
draw.
see him rub his hands together. It's a forest. I mean, it's not great, but it'll work. It's a Courser. We'll see what the top card here is. That's an Elvish Mystic. So even if the Courser does die to a Doomblade, he's got to, you know, he can play something else the next turn. So he's still doing just fine. Mutavault rolls off the top here for Musser.
So Brian was able to dodge the first bullet here, which is, do I find a third source of mana? Now his hand's functional.
Now, to me, you're probably Doomblading if you're Musser. I guess the question is, what are you Doomblading?
With the Elvish Mystic on top, I think you had to go after the Courser.
Okay. Because I think you have to Doomblade something now. I could be wrong about that, and it looks like I am wrong about that, as here's a Domri off the top.
Well, now that he gets to wait for Brian to draw before Brian enters his main phase, that can inform his decision on what he wants to do.
This is true.
If there's a land on top, he's almost certainly just using it on the Courser. I still think ultimately it's correct to go after a Courser here, as if Brian finds a red mana, it unlocks all the mana that he needs to cast everything, but it's still a decision point.
Yeah, that may have been a situation there where Musser's plan was to stop Brian in his draw step. And so now here is an Elvish Mystic. And we'll see what the follow-up is going to be here. Just an attack for 2, which is a pretty simple start. Again, Musser knows Braun-Duin's hand right now. He knows every single card, so he can plan accordingly. The question is, does he want to fire off this Doomblade? Does he have any interest in doing that?
It seems like a huge risk to allow Brian to look at another land next turn, potentially a red source of mana. He does have to, I guess Dan also has to concern himself with the Palacranos he knows is in Brian's hand. If he doesn't have an answer to that, that's troubling as well.
He's going to take 2. This is very telling. If he's letting these things happen, draws a Swamp for the turn. He's going to fire off a Duress, it looks like. Yep. Vraska, Domri, Palacranos. There goes Vraska. Domri on top of the deck, so no reason to take that. Going to play a Swamp and just pass the turn back. He's very patient. Take a draw. He's going to stop him in his draw step. There's an Overgrown Tomb. Does he want to fire off now?
I think he's still saving this Doomblade for Palacranos. If he has another answer to Palacranos in his hand, that's one thing. But if not, I think he's going to just let this Courser hang out here, answer the Palacranos, and try to race.
Okay. Well, here's Palacranos. So this is what he's been saving Doomblade for. He's even been stopping Brian in his draw step. Yeah, so there's Doomblade to take care of that. So presumably that's his only answer to what's going on at this point. So Musser's going to quickly draw a card. He draws a copy of Temple of Silence, has a Mutavault in his hand. Going to play a Mutavault, going to play Desecration Demon and pass the turn back.
Great sequencing right here from Dan. Has, again, set the game up to the place where he wants it to be.
Well, Brian has found his red mana now. So now Brian gets to play Magic again. Again, he's got multiple Domries and a Mizium Mortars in his hand. He's going to take 1 from this. Going to go down to 18. Top card is a Mizium Mortars. I wonder if that's going to come back to hurt Musser. Again, he's had the option the entire game to Doomblade that Courser and chose not to. Not saying it's right or wrong. We'll just see if it comes back to hurt him.
Yeah, if in the event that he only had the 1 removal spell for a large creature, then he almost certainly needs to save it for Palacranos.
This is a Domri. That's going to come in with 3. It'll tick up to 4. Obviously not going to find a creature because Mortar's on top. Just has to pass the turn back. Obviously no good attacks. Musser going to take a draw here. It's a Swamp. He's got an Underworld Connections. Look like he has Grey Merchant in his hand as well. I think the easy place to start here is maybe just put that Desecration Demon trigger on the stack and see what Brian does. Brian's going to sacrifice Elvis Mystic, so it's going to become a 7/7, but it's tapped for right now.
And with the resources, you know, with Dan at a pretty high life total here, he's got to be happy with how this game's going. Underworld Connections can start finding some removal spells. Grey Merchant's a big swing. You know, he's probably going to take some lumps along the way. Catching back up life total-wise is very good for him here. So Dan, again, carving a path here.
He was very, very patient with that Doomblade. Now, in this particular turn, do you want to drop Gray Merchant, or do you want to put Connections into play?
Connections. This feels like it's going to be a card advantage attrition game. Every removal spell that Dan finds is so valuable because it gets closer and closer to Desecration Demon just being able to hit, and it sets up a larger Gray Merchant down the line.
Okay, we'll go with the Connections on a Mutavault. He'll play a Temple of Silence as well. Don't forget, he does have a Swamp in his hand, but opted to put that on a Mutavault. You don't see that a ton with Underworld Connections. Going to consult his hand before putting that card to the bottom. And he'll just pass the turn back. Ready to draw a card at any moment, as Mortars is going to go to BBD's Grip. That's a Stomping Ground. Now, this turn may not seem like the most exciting one for Brian, but we could see, Stomping Ground coming to play untapped. He's going to go to 17 and double Mortars the Desecration Demon.
And again, it's not pretty, but it's not a bad turn.
Yeah. You see, Brian really doesn't have great options in his hand. Yeah, that looks like a double Mortars on the Demon. Again, these are the kind of exchanges that Mono Black wants to make. Like, if this exchange was taking place when Musser was at like 8, this would be more troublesome. But Musser's at 14.
Yeah.
These are the kinds of exchanges he wants to have happen. Your 2 cards for mine, and I'm going to draw a card? Sure.
Let's play a nice slow game here, and I got Connections online.
I'll get rid of this Domri eventually. I promise you that. So you see he has a Gray Merchant. He has a Lifebane Zombie in his hand as well. 10 life to play around with right now. He's not low enough to really be worried just yet, as he's going to play a Swamp, it looks like, to start his turn.
Dan needs to be mindful. That's the word I would use right now. He's not under immediate pressure to die, but he does have to be conscious of his life total. But I think that Dan wants to hang on for as long as possible before deploying this Gray Merchant. Try to develop his board as much as he can, because that's a really powerful tool right now.
And he just wants to have it be as big a swing as possible. I think right now he's considering maybe playing a Lifebane Zombie. The issue with that is it's not really at its best just because of Domri. Mm-hmm. It'd be more than I think Brian would be more than happy to fight, Courser into Lifebane Zombie. So now he's just going to drop the Gray Merchant now, push himself up to 14, as Brian's going to draw a Stomping Ground and turn over a Blood Crypt. He really, really, really needs to find some sort of creature that does something, as Blood Crypt's going to come into play untapped. Top card here is going to be a Stormbreath Dragon. That's the card he was looking for.
And it gets to use every part of the Buffalo here. Courser gets a land, and then Domri gets a creature.
Yep. That's the exact kind of turn he needed to get things back in his favor. Now he gets to drop down the Stormbreath Dragon, come across for 4 points of damage in the air. Musser's going to go back down to 10. And as you mentioned, Dan needs to be mindful of his life total, as he's going to go down to 9 now. Needs to probably find a removal spell for that Stormbreath Dragon, and actually has to care about Domri now. It's at 6, almost to 7.
It's getting close. And being able to fight over Domri necessitates finding more removal spells, because the Courser on defense right now is locking out all of Dan's attacks.
This is a Temple of Silence to start. This is going to put the top card to the bottom. Going to draw a card. Down to 8 he goes.
And keep in mind that Brian has the ability to go monstrous with Stormbreath Dragon next turn. So
now he's already played a land for the turn, and this was something. This is bad news for Musser, because what he wants to be able to do is play a land so that he can play Desecration Demon and have Devour Flesh at the ready to target himself, but he can no longer do that.
Yes. This is big trouble. And even Desecration Demon would just be a speed bump right now.
Yeah.
Brian would just go monstrous with Stormbreath Dragon, and it's a chump blocker.
So now you see Musser considering, okay, it might be blocking time now. How do I block? What do I have to do about Domri's fight? Monstrosity on the Stormbreath Dragon. It was so important, I think, for not only for Brian to find a creature that turn, but finding Stormbreath Dragon on that turn.
Yeah, specifically Stormbreath was the best thing.
That's a Lifebane Zombie. That'll show you a Domri and a Stomping Ground. And now Musser is kind of stuck in this situation where he's just got to get cards out of his hand.
Yes.
So Braun-Duin's going to untap. He's going to draw a copy of Domri. He already has one in play. There's a copy of Xenagos. That's going to have to stay on top. 2 Domris and a Stomping Ground in the Jund Monster player's hand. With the ability to go monstrous on that Stormbreath Dragon.
Curious to see how Brian wants to start this turn. A lot of things he's potentially playing around. is he willing to use his whole turn Monster into the Stormbreath Dragon when if there's a removal spell in the response, it's kind of troubling.
Yeah, they have access to so many.
Yeah.
I mean, we can take a look at Musser's deck list and know that there's Devour Flesh and Bile Blight and Doomblade, but I mean, who's to say he doesn't have Ultimate Price in his deck this weekend?
Right.
He's got to sit there and try to bluff something.
And this is what sort of I was speaking to in the sideboard games. Both Grey Merchant and Devour Flesh have been really low impact cards so far.
Mm-hmm. And now Brian, has to, this is a situation where you have to give a great player like Musser credit.
Mm-hmm.
It's, against maybe a different player, it would be easier for him to say, whatever, monstrosity, let's go for it. But given the situation that he's in right now he's really got to think things through. As he's going to say, all right, I will activate Domri. Of course, he's going to fight your Lifebane zombie. That's going to happen. In comes Stormbreath Dragon. Will he activate the monstrosity on this?
He can just
will not.
pass.
Yeah, he won't do it.
Nothing wrong with passing here. See what Dan's up to.
Yeah, but if you're Musser, that feels like a win, right? You got what you wanted to in that situation. He says, in your draw step, I'm going to activate the monstrosity here. Interesting.
Yeah, this is better against Doomblade or Ultimate Price because it means Dan has to burn the 2 mana this turn as opposed to when it was free last turn.
He's going to activate Underworld Connections. Now he's going to go down to 3. Can he find a Hero's Downfall or a Doomblade? He finds a copy of Desecration Demon. So he did not find what he was looking for. So now he has to cast probably Devour Flesh on himself. Yep. He'll gain a little bit of life and take some damage. He's going to play a Swamp as he's not played a land yet this turn. And I think his hand is just double Desecration Demon.
Yeah, Swamp.
Yeah, that's going to do it. So Ryan Braun-Duin is going to win this match over Dan Musser. He moves on to 6-0. Jun Monsters gets the job done over Mono Black Devotion as Musser was not able to find a Doomblade or a Hero's Downfall to take care of the Dragon. But you got to say, that was timely on that Stormbreath Dragon. He needed it right then, did Brian?
Well, it's not clear if he was